Wes Streeting.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by joining others in expressing my condolences to the family of Lance Bombardier, Ciara Sullivan. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I also begin by saying what a pleasure it is to follow my parliamentary neighbour, the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green, despite our best efforts to retire him at the last general election. The test of any of us in politics is, did we leave things in a better place than we found them? Thanks to the choices made by this Labour government, the NHS is on the road to recovery. Waiting lists fell by 110,000 in March, the single biggest fall in a single month outside of the pandemic for 17 years. Ambulance response times for heart attack and strokes are now the fastest in 5 years. Patient satisfaction with access to general practice has gone from 60% to 75%. And at a time when public trust in politicians is low, we hit our target of recruiting 8,500 more mental health workers 3 years early. And on social care, I'm proud that we're putting in an extra £4 billion worth of investment, that we've delivered the biggest expansion of carers' allowance since the 1970s, that the £150 million extra in the Disabled Facilities Grant is providing more dignity, freedom and independence to thousands more disabled people, and that the first ever fair pay agreements will be delivered in social care, because the people who care for our loved ones should never struggle to care for their own. All made possible thanks to the efforts of the entire NHS and social care team. In the 4.5 years I've led for Labour on health and social care, I've met the best of them, the ones who ran towards danger in Southport and fought to save those children, the ones who scrubbed up and went to work during the pandemic while the rest of us retreated to safety, the ones who bring new life into the world, and the ones who hold our hands at the end. Leading that team has been the greatest joy of my life, and the depth of love and gratitude I have for the people I've worked with is beyond words. The brilliant team of ministers and officials at the Department of Health and Social Care, particularly my private office, and NHS England, and the best team of special advisors in government, and the leaders and frontline staff across this remarkable system. I am rooting for all of them and for my successor, who has my wholehearted support as he takes on the best job in government. I won't pretend that leaving government hasn't been an emotional wrench. The scars I bear on my abdomen from my cancer treatment are a daily reminder to me of a time in my life, not so long ago, when I wasn't thinking about politics, only survival, and the NHS was there for me when I needed it. Walking through the doors of my department every day as the person entrusted with protecting the very service that saved my life has been a massive responsibility and the most enormous privilege, and not one I gave up lightly or hastily. I left the government because we are in the fight of our lives against nationalism, and it is a fight that we are currently losing. Unless we change course, we risk handing the keys of number 10 to reform, and I do not want that on our consciences. For the first time in our history, nationalists are in power in every corner of the United Kingdom. Scottish and Welsh nationalism represents an existential threat to the future integrity of the United Kingdom. And Reform UK represent a threat to the values and ideals that have made this country great. Values and ideals that are written into the DNA of the National Health Service they would dismantle, given the chance. Its very existence, an act of courage as well as conviction, that healthcare should be provided based on what each of us need, not what any of us can afford. A reminder that even in our darkest hours, this country is capable of doing big things. It is our responsibility to defend that promise and the values it represents, not just for the NHS or even for the survival of this government, but to win the battles we thought that were long since won, of progressives against reactionaries, of patriots versus nationalists, of hope over hate. That is our fight, It's Andy Burnham's fight in Makerfield, and it is Labour's fight for the soul of our country. Yeah. For too long, and for too often, patriotism in Britain has been left to the loudest voices and the narrowest arguments, as though love of country belongs to one tribe, one party, or one point of view. But the Britain I believe in is bigger than that, because patriotism is not about who you exclude. It is about who you stand beside. It is not rooted in fear of change or suspicion of difference. It is rooted in solidarity, in the belief that we rise or fall together. That is the best of our country's story. A Britain where people from different backgrounds, different faiths, different nations and regions still see themselves in one another. A country where the son of Indian pharmacists can become our first Hindu Prime Minister without having his Englishness questioned. A patriotism built not on blood and soil, but on shared values, shared institutions, and shared responsibilities. I understand that the SNP and Plaid Cymru will not see themselves in the English nationalist politics of the party that sits behind them. But nationalism is not progressive, and nationalism and patriotism are not the same things. Nationalism says, look inward, protect your own, turn away from the others. Patriotism says, this country is strongest when we are confident enough to be outward-looking, generous and united. United, but not always the same. On these benches, we believe in a stronger Scotland and a stronger Wales as part of a fairer United Kingdom. And 28 years ago this week, the people of Northern Ireland took a leap of faith and voted to endorse the Good Friday Agreement, the triumph of hope over bitter enmity, a reminder that a bigger and better politics is possible when people have courage. That is why we must reject the politics that tries to divide us, whether it's dividing the countries of the United Kingdom or the people who call Britain their home. The nurse from Nigeria is not the enemy of the factory worker in Newcastle. The family fleeing war is not responsible for the cost of living crisis. Division is the oldest trick in politics, and Britain deserves better than that. Because the future of this country will not be built by setting neighbour against neighbour. It will be built by renewing the bonds between us, decent jobs, strong public services, safe communities, a place we can call home, and a sense that everyone has a stake in Britain's success. That is the patriotism we need today. Not a brittle nationalism built on grievance, but a confident British patriotism, decent, fair-minded, internationalist, bound together in common endeavour with the conviction that our greatest strength has always been one another. We need to mobilise that spirit as we face the gathering storm. The war in Iran may be over for now, but this fragile peace has not resolved the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz. Even if it were resolved tomorrow, the long-tail consequences for the global economy and the British people will be stark. And the tragedy for this government is that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has been delivering the fastest-growing economy in the G7, falling inflation and lower interest rates. Her hard work undermined by the consequences of a war we did not choose. And I pay tribute to the Prime Minister for keeping us out of it. It will be painful for the British people who have weathered crisis after crisis, some imposed on us, like the wars in Iran and Ukraine and the pandemic. Others, like austerity, Brexit, and Liz Truss's joyride with the British economy, the result of poor political leadership. When I gave my maiden speech 11 years ago, I argued that none of the problems facing our country would be solved by leaving the European Union. Today, in the dangerous and volatile world we find ourselves in, dominated by an unpredictable superpower in the USA, a rising superpower in China, and a failed superpower in Russia, it is even more clear that we would have been better off leading Europe than leaving the European Union. Not despite our sovereignty, and the need to control our borders, but to enable those things. Yeah. This is why I argue for a new special relationship. It is also why I welcome the assurances that the government is strengthening sanctions on Russia to underline our rock-solid support that we have given President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. Yeah. The front line in Ukraine is the front line for our freedom and democracy, and we are meant to be the party of internationalism and solidarity. It is only too disappointing to see reform councillors taking down the Ukraine flag when the British people want to fly it in solidarity. It is truly, truly shameful. No. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, NATO's Secretary-General is right to warn today that our alliance has an unhealthy reliance on one ally. We need to invest more heavily in our defence and more rapidly. I know my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, and his team do not need persuading on this, nor do they need lectures from the Conservative Party, who ran down our capability and now have the audacity to heckle from the sidelines like the arsonist complaining that the fire brigade hasn't turned up fast enough. I'm with the Secretary of State and his team all the way. But we also, he says, the Shadow Secretary of State says bankrupting the country. I think he's thinking about Liz Truss and the joyride that no doubt he was cheering on. I think a period of silence, or at least an apology, might be welcome from the Conservative front bench. But we also need to recognise that a nation draws its strength from the condition of its people. A recent survey of 16 to 29-year-olds suggested that around half of all young people in this country wouldn't be prepared to fight for it. I'm not so sure about that. I think they would be every bit as brave and self-sacrificing as their grandparents and great-grandparents were, or as their contemporaries holding back the Russians in Ukraine have been. When the cause is just and the need is urgent, they will step up, regardless of what they might have told opinion pollsters. I know this because when this country was facing a dire threat from COVID, young people did step up. The generation least at risk gave up the most to help the rest of us keep safe. Yeah. And how did Britain repay them? Shortchanging them on their education, layering on debt, making it harder to get on the housing ladder, failing to protect them from the AI jobs apocalypse. This generation is the first left totally exposed to the time-sucking algorithms and perils of social media. The Education Secretary and I have raised our concerns about the impact of this on their learning and their well-being, but I also wonder what it is doing to their sense of connection with community and country. But patriotism isn't a lecture the old deliver to the young. It's a relationship. And for generations, Britain understood that relationship as a social contract. You work hard, you play by the rules, you contribute to society, and in return, you can build a decent life, a secure job, home of your own, a family if you want one, and the hope and conviction that your children will do better than you did. A generation ago, the average home cost around 4 times average earnings. In many parts of Britain today, it is 8, 10, even 12 times earnings. Private rents consume vast proportions of household income. Millions of young people who work hard and do the right thing cannot see a path to home ownership or security. Today, nearly 1 million young people are not in education, employment or training. Many are trapped in insecure work, unable to move out, delaying starting their families, postponing adulthood itself. And layered on top of this economic insecurity is a new technological anxiety. For generations, people believed there was a ladder of advancement, an entry-level job, skills acquired over time, promotion, security, progress. Now many young people fear that artificial intelligence may remove the lower rungs of that ladder altogether. They ask, what skills will still matter? Will there still be routes into stable, middle-class lives for kids from working-class families like mine? Will deindustrialisation, be replaced with reindustrialisation and the jobs of the future? Will opportunities extend to our towns, rural and coastal communities, or will inequality become entrenched? These are not irrational fears. They are rooted in real economic change. And unless mainstream democratic politics can answer these questions, others will exploit that vacuum. They already are. Defence is about hard power and capabilities, but it is underpinned by the soft power that binds a country together: pride, belonging, shared activities and institutions, hope. We need to rebuild them for modern times. This is the calling of the Labour Party, brought into existence to champion the interests of the working man and woman, the many, not just the privileged few. It gave this kid from a council estate in Stepney in East London the chance to realise my potential, to go to a great university and spend my career tackling the injustices that hold other kids from backgrounds like mine back. The greatest tragedy of Britain today is that the next generation, for the first time in our modern history, face worse prospects than the last. So the question isn't whether young people would fight for their country, but when their country is going to fight for them. This is our generational challenge. To not only deal with the immediate issues of affordability, small boats and NHS waiting lists, but also to face up to a turbulent world being remade by climate change and the biggest and fastest industrial revolution in the history of the world. To make sure that no one is left behind and no one is held back. That's our job now, as the old economy of the 20th century finally gives way to the AI revolution of the 21st. And to tackle the crisis facing the next generation as an emergency with the urgency that the moment requires. Never waste a minute. That's been my mantra in government, and it's why I don't believe our party has time to waste in government treading water. Because the thing about emergencies is that they make the impossible possible. Look back at the crises we've confronted. We couldn't vaccinate against the deadly virus until we could. We couldn't nationalise the banking system until we could. We couldn't reorient our entire manufacturing base towards building aircraft until we could. We couldn't build hundreds of thousands of homes fit for heroes until we could. In times of greatest peril, our country has been capable of doing big things. We still can. Britain used to punch above its weight in the world. We still can. Each generation used to provide a better future for the next. We still can. Another member of the Cancer Club, the late great bow babe, Dame Deborah James, famously said, "Take risks, love deeply, have no regrets, and always, always have rebellious hope." It is with that in mind, and with the belief that we can and must do better, with deep love for my party and my country, with no regrets, and with rebellious hope, that I have left the government. The Labour Party was elected to deliver real change. We still can. Yeah.